It was a calm evening in a small suburban town in America, sometime in the late 1970s. The streets were quiet, the streetlights casting gentle glows across neatly trimmed lawns. The houses sat in perfect rows, each one almost identical, and yet each holding its own stories, its own lives. But tonight, something unusual was stirring, something that no one would forget for decades to come. In one of those houses lived the Thompson family. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, along with their two children, Emily and Jacob, and their elderly grandmother, lived a life that appeared ordinary to anyone passing by. On that evening, the family followed their usual routine. Mr. Thompson checked the mailbox and found the daily letters. Mrs. Thompson was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner while humming an old tune she often sang when the children were young. Emily and Jacob were playing quietly in the living room while Grandma sat in her armchair, knitting and occasionally looking out the window to observe the neighborhood. But beneath this calm, there was a sense of unease. Shadows seemed a little longer than usual, and the flickering porch lights seemed to dance in a strange rhythm. A neighbor, looking out of their window, thought they saw a figure move past the Thompson backyard, but when they blinked, nothing was there. It was subtle, almost easy to dismiss, yet it lingered in the minds of those who noticed it. As the evening grew darker, the family began their nightly routines. Dinner was eaten, dishes were washed, and the children were tucked into bed. The house was quiet, serene. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But around midnight, a strange stillness settled over the neighborhood. It was a silence so deep that even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade away. The next morning, something was wrong. Mr. Thompson's neighbor, Mrs. Clark, had come to borrow some sugar, as she did often, but when she knocked on the door, there was no answer. Strange, she thought. Mr. Thompson was always prompt and polite. She tried the doorknob, locked, but the lock hadn't been tampered with. The windows were closed and secured. No sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry. Mrs. Clark called the local police. Officers arrived quickly and began to investigate. They knocked on doors, asked neighbors questions, and slowly walked through the empty house. Everything seemed normal, everything except for the absence of the family. There were no signs of a fight, no signs that anyone had left in a hurry, no indications that they had gone anywhere. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. The neighborhood was shocked. People gathered in clusters, whispering theories and sharing their own sightings. Some claimed they had heard faint voices late at night. Others insisted they had seen lights flickering in the Thompson house long after everyone should have been asleep. But no one had any concrete answers. The police were equally baffled. The investigation continued, with officers carefully examining the house, the backyard, even the nearby woods, yet every trail ended with nothing at all. Newspapers quickly picked up the story. Headlines screamed in bold letters, "Family mysteriously disappeared from suburban town. No sign of Thompson family, authorities stumped," and "A town in shock after unexplained vanishing." The story captured the imagination of the local community and soon reached other towns, sparking debates and theories. Was it foul play, a kidnapping, or something far stranger? No one could say. In the weeks that followed, the case remained unsolved. Detectives came and went, new leads appeared and then vanished. Friends and relatives of the Thompson family were interviewed multiple times, yet nobody could shed any light on the mystery. The house remained as it was on the night of their disappearance, an empty shell holding nothing but unanswered questions. But what the police didn't know, what the neighbors couldn't see, and what would not come to light for decades was that the family had left behind something small but significant, a diary hidden in the attic, its pages yellowed with age, filled with entries that would later reveal secrets, warnings, and clues that no one could have imagined at the time. Even now, as the town slowly returned to normal, the Thompson house stood silent, its windows reflecting the morning sun, keeping the family's secrets locked within. A calm suburban neighborhood on the outside, but a mystery that would haunt anyone who dared to look too closely. And it wasn't until many years later that the diary was discovered, revealing hidden messages and clues that hinted at what had truly happened that night. But the entries only raised more questions, questions that would lead investigators and curious minds alike. Years had passed since the Thompsons disappeared. The town carried on, slowly erasing the memory of that quiet suburban family from daily life. Yet the mystery lingered. It was the kind of story people whispered about in hushed tones when strangers asked about the neighborhood, a story that grew stranger the more it was told. And it wasn't until a distant relative, long unaware of the diary's existence, decided to clean out the attic of the old Thompson house that the next chapter began. The attic was dark, with beams of sunlight filtering through tiny windows, dust dancing in the air. Old trunks, stacks of faded newspapers, and boxes of forgotten belongings lined the walls. Among them, tucked away beneath a loose floorboard, the relative found a small, worn, leather-bound diary. Its cover was cracked and fragile, the edges yellowed with age. She lifted it carefully, almost instinctively knowing that it was important. The diary belonged to Mrs. Thompson. Opening the first page, the handwriting was delicate but hurried, as though she had been recording events quickly in the dark of night. Almost immediately, it became clear that the diary was more than just personal thoughts. There were warnings, dates, and cryptic notes that hinted at things that no one else had known. The first entries spoke of ordinary life, shopping trips, family gatherings, and small joys. But soon, the tone shifted. The words grew tense, and descriptions of odd occurrences began to appear. Footsteps in the hallway at night when no one was there, strange shadows outside the windows, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Even Emily and Jacob, in their entries, mentioned hearing voices and feeling watched. The diary didn't reveal everything at once, only small, unsettling pieces of information. As the relative read on, one page caught her eye. It was dated just 2 days before the family vanished. The writing was almost frantic. "They are outside again. I don't know how much longer we have. We must follow the plan exactly. No mistakes this time." The entry didn't explain who they were, nor did it specify the plan, but there was urgency, fear, and determination on every line. The handwriting shook in places as though Mrs. Thompson herself had been frightened. The next few pages included sketches, a map of the town, the house, and the surrounding area, with marks and notes in red ink. One corner showed the old woods behind the neighborhood circled multiple times. Another had the word escape written hastily. There were references to coded times and mysterious signals, perhaps meant to coordinate with someone unknown. It became apparent that the family had been preparing for something important, something they believed might save them or protect them from a danger no one else had seen. But what kind of danger could have led a family to vanish entirely, leaving behind no trace of themselves? The diary didn't give answers, it only deepened the questions. Shadows, footsteps, whispers, strange figures glimpsed in the corners of rooms. The entries built a pattern of growing tension, and each entry ended with a note that hinted at urgency, as though time was slipping away faster than anyone realized. The relative continued reading late into the afternoon, occasionally pausing to catch her breath. Each page revealed layers of a hidden world, the normalcy of daily life masking secrets, the mundane hiding terror. It was as if the family had been living 2 lives, one in plain view, another under constant, unrelenting fear. In the diary, Mrs. Thompson made references to signals from someone or something watching the family. Notes about lights flickering in unusual patterns, footsteps that didn't match anyone in the house, and signs in the nearby streets that only she seemed to notice. One page read, "We must be ready tonight. They do not sleep. We cannot fail. I hope the children are brave enough." The relative shivered, realizing that these entries were not just memories, they were instructions, a chronicle of fear and preparation. The diary was a window into a world no one else had seen, a place of tension and danger hidden behind the ordinary suburban facade. By the final pages, the entries were almost indecipherable, rushed and broken. The handwriting slanted, the words jumbled as Mrs. Thompson attempted to keep pace with events she could barely describe. Mentions of shadows converging near the house, strange figures in the woods, and the family's meticulous preparation for something unknown dominated the last lines. And yet, the diary ended abruptly. There were no explanations of what happened next, no indication of where the family went or how they disappeared, only a blank space on the final page, leaving the story unfinished and the mystery unsolved. The diary had opened a door into the past, revealing clues and warnings that no one had seen before, but the entries only hinted at the truth. To uncover what really happened to the Thompson family, the clues needed to be pieced together, and what they revealed would shock anyone who tried to follow their path. As the diary's pages unfolded, it became clear that the Thompson family had been preparing for something extraordinary. The warnings, the dates, the coded messages, they weren't random. They were part of a plan, a careful, meticulous attempt to protect themselves from an unseen danger. The relative who had discovered the diary began to piece together the patterns, realizing that every word Mrs. Thompson had written pointed toward a purpose beyond ordinary life. The first hints of this plan appeared in the entries dated weeks before the family vanished. Mrs. Thompson described daily routines, errands, and mundane tasks, but scattered between these were notes about practice drills, secret storage places, and observations of unusual activity in the neighborhood. The family had mapped every street, every alley, and even every neighbor's schedule. There were sketches of the house from the outside, markings showing where shadows tended to appear, and notes about lights that flickered in ways no ordinary household would experience. Emily and Jacob had been included in this plan too. Their entries were brief but telling. They described whispered instructions, small tests of courage, and games that were actually drills for noticing things adults might miss. It was as if the family had created their own secret system to detect danger, to respond to it in ways that outsiders could never comprehend. The diary also mentioned the figures several times. It was never clear whether these were human or something else entirely. Shadows moving at odd hours, unexplained noises, glimpses of someone or something at the edge of vision. Mrs. Thompson seemed determined to protect her family without revealing too much, perhaps knowing that anyone reading these words too soon might not understand. One passage stood out in particular, dated only days before the disappearance. It read, "If we follow the plan exactly, we can escape the danger. The children must stay brave. They do not understand the full scope yet, but they will. We must move when the lights align and the signals are correct." The relative, reading this, could only wonder what the lights and signals meant. The diary provided no explanations, only careful notations, diagrams, and arrows pointing to locations that had never been examined. One page showed a map with the neighborhood, the nearby woods, and even distant streets marked with red X's connected by lines and symbols that seemed meaningful only to the Thompsons. As the entries continued, the tension built. Mrs. Thompson wrote of late-night observations, a figure standing across the street watching the house, unusual noises in the yard, footsteps approaching and receding, and the children noticing things she couldn't explain. Every note emphasized the importance of timing, precision, and silence. The family had developed a system to coordinate, a sequence of actions designed to ensure their safety. But the diary also revealed the unknown variables. The family did not know exactly what or who they were facing. Mrs. Thompson wrote, "We cannot predict everything. The danger shifts, moves, and watches, but we can prepare. If we fail, there will be nothing left to find." The relative paused as she read this line, realizing how meticulous and careful the family had been. Every precaution, every secret measure was a reflection of a deep awareness of threat and the love of a mother and grandmother determined to keep their family safe. The children's entries became more urgent as the days progressed. They wrote of shadowed corners, of noises that didn't match anyone in the house, and of times when the adults whispered outside their room, exchanging hurried glances. It was clear that Emily and Jacob understood more than a child should, and yet they were brave, following instructions they barely understood. The entries also hinted at outside help, or at least the need for it. There were cryptic references to someone watching from afar, possibly a friend, possibly a stranger, leaving notes or signals for the family to see. It was never clear who or what this presence was, but the entry suggested that the Thompsons were relying on outside coordination as part of their plan. As the relative continued to read, a chilling realization settled in. The family knew something was coming, something imminent, something so dangerous that the careful routines and planning were not merely precautions, they were essential for survival. And yet, the diary offered no reassurance, only a roadmap filled with uncertainty, fear, and determination. Then came the final pages of this section of the diary. The handwriting grew hurried, almost frantic, as Mrs. Thompson described the last rehearsals, the timing, and the alignment of signals. The entries ended abruptly with the note, "Tonight, we execute the plan. If we succeed, we will be free. If we fail, I pray the children will be safe. The figures are closer than ever." The diary ended here, leaving the reader with a sense of mounting tension. The plan was set, the family prepared, but what awaited them that night was unknown. The relative held the diary tightly, sensing the gravity of what had been written and the urgency of what was coming next. The night had finally arrived. Every precaution, every hidden signal, every silent observation would be tested. The Thompson family stepped into the darkness, following a plan that no one else could comprehend. But no one knew, would they succeed, or would the shadows claim them entirely? The night had finally arrived. The Thompson family, prepared for weeks, had followed every precaution, memorized every detail, and rehearsed every movement. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, as the moonlight cast gentle shadows across the lawn. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves seemed amplified in the stillness. Mr. Thompson checked the doors one final time. The locks clicked shut, the windows secured. He glanced at Mrs. Thompson, whose expression was calm but tense, her eyes betraying the worry she carried for her children and mother. Emily and Jacob sat quietly, clutching small bags the family had packed weeks ago, their eyes wide but obedient, ready to follow the instructions they barely understood but trusted nonetheless. The first signs of unusual activity appeared almost immediately. From the corner of the living room, a shadow flickered across the wall, moving in a way that did not match the rhythm of the family. Emily noticed it first, whispering to Jacob that someone was there, though no one appeared to be outside the window. Mrs. Thompson simply nodded, gesturing for them to stay calm. The plan had anticipated unexpected observations, and she had rehearsed their response countless times. The family moved through the house with deliberate care. Each step was calculated. Mrs. Thompson led them to the hidden passageway in the basement, a narrow corridor that had been constructed to connect to the woods behind the property. Maps, symbols, and signals they had studied for days guided them, ensuring that each member knew exactly where to go. The night seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if time itself was holding its breath. Outside, the neighborhood was silent, but shadows moved with intent. Figures seemed to watch from the edges of the street, glimpses of forms that vanished when anyone looked directly. The diary had warned of this. The family had noted patterns of these sightings, times when the shadows would approach, and signs to indicate their presence. Tonight, the signs were unmistakable. As they reached the basement exit, Mrs. Thompson checked again. Lights flickered across the yard, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Jacob held his mother's hand tightly, while Emily adjusted the small bag over her shoulder, the contents carefully packed for a journey into uncertainty. The family's hearts beat in unison, guided by fear, determination, and the hope that the plan would succeed. The first step outside was deliberate. The cool night air brushed their faces, the moonlight revealing paths they had studied for weeks. Every movement was synchronized, every glance measured, yet the sense of being watched never left them. The shadows appeared closer now, shifting, moving with a purpose that no one could understand. Mr. Thompson whispered instructions, guiding his family toward the woods where the plan's next stage awaited. Halfway through the route, an unexpected sound froze them in place. A distant shout, or perhaps the crack of a branch, echoed unnaturally in the dark. Emily's voice trembled as she whispered, "Are they following us?" Mrs. Thompson placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Stay calm, follow the signs, trust the plan," she said. As they entered the woods, the dense trees seemed to close around them. The moonlight filtered through the leaves in scattered beams, illuminating the path the family had memorized. Every rustle, every snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. But they moved forward, guided by the signals, the diary, and each other. Suddenly, a figure emerged at the edge of their vision, just beyond the path. It paused, then disappeared into the darkness. The family did not falter, though their breaths came faster, hearts pounding. Every step seemed both familiar and dangerous, a delicate balance between survival and discovery. The woods, usually quiet and comforting, now felt alive, almost aware of their presence. The final stretch approached, a small clearing the family had marked on the map, the point where their escape or confrontation would occur. The signals aligned exactly as the diary had predicted. Shadows lingered at the perimeter, distant but deliberate. The family moved silently, each step a silent prayer, each movement rehearsed and precise. And then, just as they reached the clearing, a sudden shift in the darkness startled them. Shapes moved quickly, shadows converging faster than expected. The children clung to their parents, but the family did not panic. They had rehearsed this moment countless times, yet nothing could fully prepare them for the reality of it. And then, in the blink of an eye, it happened. One instant they were moving forward, the next they were gone. The shadows seemed to swallow them entirely. The clearing remained empty, still bathed in moonlight. Only a faint rustle of leaves lingered where they had walked, a whisper of footsteps that had vanished. The woods returned to silence. The neighborhood, still unaware, continued in its quiet routine. Yet the Thompson house, the paths they had walked, and the diary tucked away in the attic remained as the only witnesses to their disappearance. By morning, the family had vanished completely. No signs of struggle, no clues, no footprints leading anywhere. Only the diary remained, holding cryptic messages and warnings that hinted at what had occurred. The police arrived to an empty house, the neighborhood buzzing with fear and speculation. But the true story, the secret of the fateful night, remained hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to follow the clues and uncover the truth. By the morning after the disappearance, the Thompson house stood silent and empty. The doors were still locked, the windows secured, and the faint scent of last night's meals lingered in the kitchen. The police arrived promptly after neighbors called, alerted by the strange absence of the family. Officers stepped carefully through the rooms, inspecting everything from top to bottom, yet found nothing out of place. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Detectives quickly took statements from neighbors. Mrs. Clark, the neighbor who had first discovered the absence, described the strange shadows she had noticed in previous weeks and her vague sense that something was off about the nights leading up to the disappearance. Other neighbors recalled faint noises in the yard or the flickering porch light that seemed unusual, but none could provide solid evidence. The detectives listened patiently, noting the subtle details, though most seemed trivial at first glance. Local media soon picked up the story. Newspapers printed bold headlines: "Family disappears without a trace," "Police baffled by Thompson mystery," and "Suburban town shaken by unexplained vanishing." The story spread beyond the neighborhood, reaching nearby towns and eventually state-level attention. Reporters visited the area, interviewing neighbors and community members, yet the mystery only deepened. Some speculated foul play, others hinted at supernatural interference, while a few insisted it was a careful and deliberate escape. No one could say for certain. Among the officers investigating the case was Detective Mark Reynolds, a seasoned investigator known for his patience and meticulous attention to detail. From the first day, he sensed that this was not a routine missing persons case. Something about the precision of the family's disappearance, the lack of evidence, and the neighborhood's eerie calm struck him as unusual. He requested access to the house on multiple occasions, examining every floorboard, every room, and every possible hiding place. Yet each time he found nothing beyond the ordinary: the faint dust of untouched surfaces and the ordinary clutter of suburban life. It was during one of these inspections that a curious officer noticed a slight disturbance in the attic floorboards. With careful prying, they uncovered a small leather-bound diary. The discovery sent a ripple of excitement and caution through the investigative team. This was not just a missing persons case anymore. It was a potential key to understanding why the Thompsons had vanished. Detective Reynolds took possession of the diary and began a careful examination. The handwriting was delicate, sometimes rushed, and full of cryptic entries. Each page revealed glimpses of the family's secret preparations, warnings of shadows and strange occurrences, and coded messages that hinted at external threats. The detective read through the entry slowly, attempting to connect the dots between what the family had observed and what could have caused their disappearance. The more he read, the more perplexing the case became. There were references to hidden paths, secret signals, and unusual timings, entries that suggested the family had anticipated danger and were prepared to act on their own plan. Yet the diary ended abruptly, leaving the final events shrouded in mystery. For every answer it seemed to offer, it raised at least two more questions. Detective Reynolds began comparing the diary to other reports from the neighborhood. He noted the mentions of lights flickering at odd times, distant footsteps, and shadowy figures. Some neighbors' accounts, previously dismissed as imagination or coincidence, now took on new significance. A pattern appeared, a series of minor disturbances that the family had documented but no one had taken seriously until now. Media attention intensified. Television crews visited the town, capturing images of the empty house and interviewing residents. The story became national news for a brief period, and discussions on radio programs speculated about every possible scenario: kidnapping, secret witnesses, mysterious figures, or even extraterrestrial involvement. But no theory could fully explain the precise and eerie disappearance of the Thompsons. The diary, combined with neighborhood reports and observations, created a complex puzzle. Detective Reynolds noted every detail, sketching maps, timelines, and diagrams to reconstruct the events of that night. He cross-referenced neighbors' sightings with entries in the diary, trying to determine if there were any external forces or individuals involved. Each lead seemed promising, but faded quickly upon closer inspection. Over weeks and months, Reynolds and his team conducted interviews, revisited crime scenes, and examined every potential clue, but the Thompson family remained missing. Their absence weighed heavily on the community, and whispers of the unknown lingered. Friends and relatives of the family continued to hold out hope while grappling with the impossibility of understanding the events. Yet hidden within the diary were subtle indications that the story was far from ordinary. Cryptic symbols, hidden notes, and references to timings suggested that the family's disappearance might not have been random. The plan they had created, carefully rehearsed and documented, hinted at a strategy to protect themselves or escape a danger unseen. And while Detective Reynolds could not yet decode the full meaning, he sensed that this diary was the only thread that could unravel the mystery. As the investigation deepened, a hidden pattern began to emerge, one that linked the diary entries, the unusual neighborhood activity, and even other mysterious events in nearby towns. The clues suggested something far larger and far more deliberate than anyone had imagined. But what exactly happened to the Thompson family, and who or what was behind the shadows? The next discovery would bring the investigation closer to a truth that had been hidden for decades. Detective Reynolds had spent countless hours poring over the diary, cross-referencing each entry with neighborhood reports and his own sketches. The more he studied, the clearer it became that the family's disappearance was not random. It followed a pattern, a sequence of events deliberately orchestrated by the Thompsons themselves. But understanding that pattern was another matter entirely. The diary revealed subtle clues that had previously been overlooked. Mrs. Thompson had carefully documented times, dates, and signals, small signs meant to guide her family or perhaps warn them of imminent danger. Lights flickered in coded sequences, shadows moved in predictable rhythms, and certain events in the neighborhood seemed to coincide with these signals. The detective began to map each note, looking for connections between the entries and real-world occurrences. One particularly intriguing detail involved the town's streetlights. Mrs. Thompson had marked a series of lights that would flicker at specific times, noting which ones were safe to pass and which indicated potential danger. By plotting these times against the diary entries, Reynolds realized that the family had created a secret schedule, a road map through their own neighborhood to avoid observation. It was meticulous, almost obsessive in its precision. The detective also noticed repeated references to certain locations: the woods behind the Thompson house, the vacant lot at the corner of Maple Street, and a small bridge over a creek a few blocks away. Each location had been carefully documented in the diary with sketches showing paths, markers, and symbols. Mrs. Thompson had anticipated the family's movements down to the smallest detail. Every action had been planned, every step calculated to ensure safety, or at least the chance of survival. Even more curious were the entries about the figures. These shadows, or watchers, as described in the diary, seemed to follow a pattern. They appeared at predictable intervals, always at the edge of vision, never fully revealed. Reynolds began cross-referencing these sightings with reports from neighbors, some of whom had noted strange movements or noises but dismissed them at the time. The patterns matched almost perfectly, confirming that the family's observations were not imaginary, they were real and significant. The diary also contained warnings of timing, coded in subtle ways. Certain events were marked with a star or a line, indicating moments when the family should act or remain still. These signals were small enough to be missed by anyone else, but crucial to the Thompsons' plan. Detective Reynolds realized that the family had been living under constant awareness of these patterns, adjusting their routines daily to avoid the unseen threat. As the detective delved deeper, he began noticing connections beyond the immediate neighborhood. References in the diary hinted at events in nearby towns, other disappearances, strange lights, and unexplained shadows. These clues suggested a larger presence, something beyond the small suburban streets, something deliberate and far-reaching. Reynolds mapped these occurrences, tracing lines that linked one event to the next, revealing a hidden network of activity that no one had considered before. The children, Emily and Jacob, had also played a role in the observations. Their diary entries described noticing subtle shifts, movement in the trees, noises in empty streets, and fleeting figures at windows. They had been trained, almost unknowingly, to recognize patterns, a silent education in survival. Their contributions to the diary added layers of insight that would otherwise have been invisible to adults unfamiliar with the plan. And yet, for all the clarity that emerged, gaps remained. The final night, the execution of the plan, still contained mysteries. Some clues led to dead ends, while others hinted at something lurking beyond the ordinary. Shadows that moved too deliberately, patterns that suggested intelligence, and signals that did not originate from any visible source all pointed to a presence that was watching, waiting, and influencing the outcome. Detective Reynolds realized that the diary was not just a record, it was a key. But a key to what, and who held the lock? The more he unraveled, the more questions arose. The meticulous planning, the coded entries, and the hidden patterns all pointed toward a family acting against forces far greater than anyone could have imagined. The diary's final pages in this section contained a single word written in large, almost desperate letters: observe. No explanation followed, no indication of what or whom they were to observe. It was a command, a warning, a fragment of insight into the family's mindset in those final days. The detective studied the word, pondering its meaning and implications. Each new realization only deepened the mystery. The family had vanished, leaving behind a carefully constructed map of actions, observations, and warnings. The diary provided clues, but the ultimate answer remained hidden, just out of reach. Reynolds felt the weight of the task before him. Every piece of information mattered, and yet the puzzle was incomplete. And then, as Reynolds pieced together the final symbols and patterns, a revelation emerged, one that hinted at the truth behind the family's disappearance, a truth so shocking that it would change everything the town thought it knew. The figures, the shadows, the coded signals, they were not random. Someone or something had orchestrated the events leading to that fateful night, and the answers were closer than anyone realized. Detective Reynolds had spent months piecing together the diary, the neighborhood reports, and the subtle patterns hidden within the family's notes. Every symbol, every shadow, every coded warning was carefully considered, and at last a picture began to form, a revelation that would finally shed light on the mystery of the Thompsons' disappearance. The truth was far more intricate than anyone could have imagined. The diary had described shadows, figures, and signals that seemed to move with intent. But these were not ordinary threats. Detective Reynolds realized that the figures were in fact individuals from outside the neighborhood, men and women who had been observing the Thompsons for weeks, perhaps months. Their presence had been hidden in plain sight, blending into the town while their attention remained fixed on the family. The family had known they were being watched. Every entry, every map, every signal had been part of a careful strategy to evade these watchers. The plan was not a flight of imagination, but a carefully executed escape designed to confuse, mislead, and ultimately disappear from view. The diary's emphasis on timing, hidden paths, and signals was the blueprint for survival. On the night of their disappearance, the final steps had been executed with precision. The shadows seen in the neighborhood were not supernatural. They were the observers, the men and women who had been tracking the family's movements. The woods, the hidden paths, and the clearing were all part of the escape plan. Every flicker of light, every rustle of leaves had been anticipated, documented, and accounted for in the diary. Emily and Jacob, guided by their parents, followed the sequence flawlessly. Each step had been rehearsed, every potential distraction mapped out. The diary notes about courage and bravery were not idle encouragement. They were essential instructions for children navigating an invisible threat. And Grandma, seated quietly and observing the signals, had played her part, remaining vigilant and calm as the family executed their carefully orchestrated plan. By the time dawn approached, the Thompsons had vanished from the clearing. The watchers, confused by the precision and foresight of the family, could not follow. The escape had succeeded, leaving no trace, no footprints, no indication of where the family had gone. It was as if the night itself had swallowed them. Detective Reynolds reviewed the diary with new eyes. He now understood the cryptic notes, the coded timings, the references to lights and shadows. They were not warnings of imaginary threats. They were instructions, tools for survival in the presence of real human danger. Every piece of the puzzle now made sense. The family had been proactive, deliberate, and courageous. They had vanished not out of fear alone, but because they had the knowledge, planning, and courage to do so. Yet even with this understanding, questions remained. Where had the family gone after escaping the clearing? How had they managed to remain unseen for so long? The diary offered no answers beyond the point of disappearance, leaving the detective and the town with only fragments of their journey. The truth was partially revealed, yet deliberately incomplete. The emotional impact was profound. The town, which had mourned and speculated for years, was confronted with a revelation that was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because the family had not been harmed, they had survived. Unsettling because the danger they had faced, the observers they had evaded, remained a shadow in the community's collective memory. Reynolds could not ignore the bravery of the Thompsons, their meticulous planning, their courage under pressure, and their ability to act with foresight were extraordinary. They had vanished not because they were victims, but because they had taken control of their own fate in the face of an unseen threat. The diary, now understood in its greater context, revealed the depth of the family's resourcefulness. Every note, sketch, and symbol was part of a coherent strategy, one that ensured survival against an opponent few would even recognize. The family's intelligence, preparation, and unity turned a terrifying situation into a successful escape, even if the public never fully grasped the details. Yet a final mystery lingered. The watchers, the figures described in the diary, had vanished from the immediate scene, but their presence was still felt in the patterns described. Were they truly gone? Had they given up? Or were they simply observing from afar, waiting for another opportunity? The detective could not say. The diary ended too soon, leaving the story incomplete, but leaving a sense of awe at what the family had achieved. The Thompson family had survived, but the legacy of that night remained, a diary filled with cryptic clues, a town left with unanswered questions, and shadows that might still be watching. And perhaps even today, someone knows more about the family's journey than they are willing to reveal. The final chapter of the mystery was yet to be told. Years had passed since the Thompson family vanished from their suburban neighborhood. The house remained empty, slowly aging while the town moved on. Yet the memory of the family and the story of that fateful night lingered in the hearts and minds of the residents. The diary, discovered years later, had given glimpses into their courage, their meticulous planning, and the mysterious forces that had watched them. But even now, long after the last page was read, the town still whispered questions no one could fully answer. Detective Reynolds, having studied the diary for months, had reached a tentative conclusion. The family had acted with intelligence, foresight, and bravery beyond what most people could imagine. They had disappeared not through chance, not through tragedy, but through a carefully orchestrated plan. Every signal, every hidden path, every rehearsal had led to their survival. And yet, the ultimate whereabouts of the family remained unknown. The legacy of the Thompsons was not simply their disappearance. It was the lesson they left behind, how ordinary lives could conceal extraordinary courage. Mrs. Thompson's diary had captured the essence of a family united, teaching even the youngest children to observe, to understand patterns, and to act decisively when faced with danger. Emily and Jacob, once children guided by notes and rehearsals, had become participants in a story that was both frightening and empowering. Even in their absence, the family had left clues, small traces that suggested a continuing presence. Occasionally, neighbors reported strange lights flickering in patterns similar to those described in the diary, or glimpsed shadows moving in ways that seemed deliberate rather than random. Some dismissed these incidents as coincidence or imagination, but others could not shake the feeling that the Thompsons were still somehow watching, still protecting themselves, or perhaps leaving messages for those who paid close attention. The diary itself became a source of fascination for the town. Scholars, journalists, and curious residents studied its pages, attempting to decode the symbols and understand the sequence of events. Each new interpretation revealed deeper layers of meaning, suggesting that the family had anticipated more than one possible outcome. Their intelligence, patience, and creativity had left a record not just of survival, but of insight into human observation and strategy. Even the local authorities, though they could not locate the family, respected the thoroughness and bravery documented in the diary. Detective Reynolds often reflected on the meticulous planning and courage required to disappear in plain sight, leaving no trace behind. It was a lesson in vigilance, foresight, and the power of preparation, qualities that had allowed the Thompsons to succeed where most would have failed. Yet the diary also left subtle hints of ongoing mystery. Certain entries suggested that the figures or watchers, the individuals who had observed the family, were still present, watching from afar. These passages were cryptic, never fully explained, and they reminded those who read them that the story was not entirely finished. The family had survived, but the shadows that had influenced their lives remained a lingering question. For the town, the Thompsons became a legend, a story shared quietly over coffee in libraries and in classrooms. Parents told their children about the family that vanished yet survived, emphasizing courage, careful observation, and the importance of thinking ahead. The diary was more than a record. It was a guide to resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to respond to the unknown with intelligence and bravery. And for Detective Reynolds, the final lesson of the case was clear. The family's disappearance was not a tragedy, but a triumph of foresight, courage, and unity. They had acted decisively in the face of unknown danger, leaving behind a story that would inspire, intrigue, and mystify for generations to come. Even today, the town remains calm, suburban, and ordinary. Yet those who pay attention might notice subtle signs, the flicker of a light at just the right moment, a shadow where none should be, or a message hidden in plain sight. The Thompson family story may have concluded for some, but for those who dare to observe carefully, the mystery continues, a whisper in the quiet night, hinting that they are still out there, watching, surviving, and leaving clues for those curious enough to follow.